morning, Mel. How are you doing?
Doing pretty well. How are things over on the West Coast?
It's a beautiful day today. We're in the throes of spring, and the birds are singing, and the sun is out, and the plants are blooming. How about with you?
Yeah, over here we're having a little bit of Mayvember.
And what's November?
It's it's when it's the 3rd of May, but it feels like November.
Wow. Yeah, moving through the seasons now, it seems like a bit of a crapshoot. It's like dodging a minefield, it seems like.
Yesterday I had absolutely no idea what to wear. I think we experienced almost a full year yesterday. So by the time I went to walk my dog, I was wearing a winter coat, but it was beautiful and sunny, but it started off like freezing and raining. So it's a little bit unstable.
And this brings us into our topic for today, which was the seasons. We wanted to talk about the seasons and their influence. Yeah?
Yeah, I think that this would be a really interesting topic, in as much as the little bits I know that I share with patients, I think they find it really interesting and helpful and helps to create quite a bit of insight into how to live well.
So, do you teach them how to live in different seasons, what to do, how to prepare themselves? What do you tell your patients?
Well, I mean, I'm still at the beginning of my understanding. There's a particular passage which I thought we could maybe share today in the Neijing that talks about it. So I haven't committed that to memory, but the kind of really basic baby step is to realize that you don't need to be doing the same thing and feeling the same way throughout the year, which means without getting into any detail at all, people feel guilty for wanting to maybe go to bed earlier in the winter or
Yeah.
not, and just to kind of free them from that and help them to see that where our energy and our activity is supposed to shift. But I'm looking forward to hearing what you're going to share.
In the Neijing, actually, they think a main cause of human suffering is not living with the seasons. I was thinking about the seasons for the talk today, and I was remembering what it was like to be young and how long a year lasted. It seemed to last forever, and now they just kind of tick off bang, 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 bang. But I remember how long a year was when I was 6 and 7, and also how it was marked by these passages of seasons and with things like Christmas and New Year's and Easter and summer vacation and Halloween, and how what magical those things were. We used to get in the car every summer and drive across the country to Michigan to where my grandparents had a cabin on a lake and spend a month there and had a water pump and an outhouse, and I remember those summer days as just being so magical. And then he also had a Christmas tree lot there, and so every summer we'd walk through the trees and pick out a tree for Christmas, which was going to be in the winter. And then in wintertime, in December, we'd get a note from the post office that there was an 8-foot Christmas tree there. And we'd go down, it was wrapped in burlap. We'd take it in and unwrap it, and all the smells would come out and the needles. And just as a child, how magical that was. I think it seemed to be easier to move with seasons than it is now. Maybe it's just that I'm older. I don't know. What do you think about that?
I don't know. I agree with your observation that as you get older, it tends to go more quickly, and that's one of the many reasons why it's nice to have a little one, because they're more in tune with now, and they're more in tune with the holidays and shifts, and a day can feel like a lifetime. When we had a bit warmer weather last week, my daughter said, "Oh, Mama, spring's breathing on my face."
Oh my goodness. Kids get this. Kids get this. And then we talk them out of it, unfortunately. So often.
Yeah.
But yeah. And the magic of it. When you're a child, you remember it's the magic of watching the leaves turn and having the apple cider, the warm cider, and things like that. And it's actually a challenge we face now with all of our patients. And I call it's about rhythm and about how rhythms have changed. And that affects us all at a very deep level. And a lot of things I do different than I did 20 years ago. One is really approach the topic of rhythm because a lot of it's been lost. And there's two things I see about that. or diminished, I should say, not lost. One is climate change. And climate change, one of its main effects is disrupting seasonal breathing. So here in Portland, we have spring 2 months earlier than when I moved here, and it's also that the seasons change throughout the day. Like you say, you don't know what to wear. And it'll be winter in the morning and spring in the afternoon and so forth. And that's because of a chaos in the breathing system. And the other thing is screens. And since 2005, when cell phones came out, 2012, social media, there are good and bad things about screens and phones, all those things, that's just like everything. But one of the challenges of screens is that they have no rhythm. And so if you think about your cell phone, it's the same at 4 o'clock in the morning. It's the same at 7 o'clock at night. It's the same in Tokyo. It's the same in San Francisco. It's a kind of chaotic rhythm signal that if we entrain to can challenge us in our own rhythms. So this idea of the seasons is so important right now. And the other thing I tell my students and my patients is that when nature's having trouble breathing itself, we can help it by reestablishing our own rhythms. So we actually help neither nature restore when we restore our own rhythms. So it's actually a very big topic.
That makes a lot of sense. At the moment, I'm doing a deep dive for the program that I run for patients on sleep, and what is important for them to understand about sleep. And roughly, I tend to get people in two categories: either people who understand how important sleep is and they're having trouble, or people who don't understand how important it is and like, yeah, it's fine and it's a mess. But I mean, quite a few things have come up from that research. One is that having a consistent sleep and wake time is like one of the most important predictors for every health outcome, especially mental health. But there isn't a physical or mental illness that is not associated with circadian disruption. And another piece of it, which I thought was quite interesting, is there's this story that's circulating quite widely that people have these different chronotypes, that some people are just night owls. And I used to be a night owl, and now I'm not, but my genetics haven't changed. And what I'm wondering is if these different chronotypes, and I know that there is a little bit of genetics in there somewhere, but maybe the chronotypes are really telling us how sensitive people are to artificial light disrupting their sleep. Because studies show that when all of these night owls and everyone else go camping away from artificial light, those differences vastly diminished. And so we get these on top of the artificial light at night, disrupting our rhythms and making us not sleepy and all of this, then we get these stories on top of it. Oh, that's just who I am, that's just when I wake up. Well, that may be when you wake up, but is that when you would wake up if things were uh, in alignment, rhythmically speaking?
Right. And it's a big challenge. We tend to take things that are so important to us for granted when they've been when we're exposed to them over and over again. Sleep is one of those things. We're really a sun-based world. Everything in the world is tied to the patterns of the sun. As you know, the rising and falling. And if you don't understand the importance of that, all you have to do is think about the fact that every 12 hours, when the sun goes down, everybody goes unconscious. And we have to have these special rooms with padded beds so we don't hurt ourselves. And that going unconscious is called sleep. And even if you're in the middle of trench warfare or something like that, everybody goes to sleep pretty much. They all go unconscious. And when the sun comes up, everybody becomes conscious again. It's really that powerful. And you can flip that and do shift work. I remember being a medical resident and ER doctor and how taxing that was. I still remember the fatigue of that, of working, nights and things. You can do it for a while. You can go without sleep for 3 days, maybe something like that. I remember the Guinness Book of World Records. They used to have a record to see who could stay awake the longest, and then they banned it because it was so dangerous.
Absolutely.
So really, these patterns are so important, and we've disrupted them with a lot of technological
Yeah.
influences, loss of light, like you say.
Yeah, I mean, there's a whole literature on the effects of shift work, and shift work is actually classified as a 2A probable carcinogen,
Yeah, yeah,
amongst other things, and of course we need our shift workers. I think 25% of the workforce are shift workers, and of course we need doctors and firefighters and ambulance drivers and all sorts of people, nurses, uh, who are awake at all hours. But we also, perhaps, want to recognize the sacrifice that they may be making. And I do believe probably that if there was more awareness of the role of shift work, that I'm guessing hospitals would be staffed in a different way, that there's probably ways you can improve upon it to minimize some of those detrimental effects that probably aren't
perhaps.
quite optimized.
I can go right back to, this was work 40 years ago. I can go right back and feel the weirdness in my bones of it. Remember what it was like. Yeah. And this goes to a deeper idea that we talked about the breathing universe. And because the seasons are just another instance of breath motion. And this is really at the core of the Neijing texts and these early ideas of Chinese medicine that we talked about before, that the world is not populated by immovable things like we think they are, but actually things in motion and transformation, that the real fabric of the universe is motion, and that the seed motion at the heart of the universe is breath, expansion and contraction, and the breath moves through different states of configuration and order and in and out of form, which is actually motion in form. So forms are actually moving too, but they're slow enough that we can feel them in a certain way. So, but all of our ideas go back to these ideas of breath. And of course, in Chinese medicine, the aspects of breath moving out in is called yang and yin. And from that, we understand everything. And that breath is what we think of as a fractal expression, meaning that it's embedded in every phenomenon in the universe, down to the smallest breath of a gnat and to the expansion of the universe. And they are different phases of breath motion, just at different scales. So the expansion of the universe phase we're in now is a yang phase of moving out. But also, I'm here breathing during the podcast, and when I inhale and expand, that's the same breath motion. It's on a different scale. The day has a breath motion. It has the morning, the early time, the springtime of the day. The summertime is at the noon. The autumn time is in the evening, um, and so forth and so forth. Your life has a breath. It's springtime phase. It's summertime phase when you're an adult. It's autumn phase when you're older. The northern phase when you're dying or being born, et cetera, et cetera. So we're looking at a basic concept, and when we see it in nature, in the passage of the year, we call it the seasons. But one thing we want to move away from is the idea that this seasonality is a clock, or a calendar on your wall. It's really a pattern of expansion and contraction and moving between different realms, being the hidden realm beneath the earth and the outwardly expressed realm out in the outer branches of the trees and so forth. And so when we're talking about syncing with seasonal breath, we're really talking about syncing with opening and closing motion and traversing the spaces between the hidden and the seen worlds, moving back and forth. The other important thing is that if I walk up to someone in the street or ask a patient, why do you breathe? Where do you breathe? Where's your breath? Most people will say the breath is in my lungs and it's powered by my brain. And that's true in a way. But it's also a smaller understanding of something we want to think of in a bigger way. So we are actually ourselves expressions of breath. And this goes back to the idea of how forms are created. And we talked last time, I think, about when wind blows through a sand dune and it creates the troughs, and the sand moves to the side and makes the hills. And the hill is actually the form, what you see, and the space between is where the wind moves. And that seems to be the principles about how our bodies are created too, that we're formed to allow patterns of motion to move through us. And in the earth, that's particularly the rising and falling pattern that you see in plants and trees between when the sun rises and the summer comes, and everything moves to the outer branches. And then in the winter comes, it moves back down into the roots. And so our bodies are really expressions of motion in form around these seasonal breath motions. That's a lot. Is that too much?
That's a lot. You know, that's reminded me of something interesting because you're one thing you've tied in there. You've tied in a lot. I mean, that's quite profound. You get sometimes you get you know you get spoiled by hearing these amazing insights. But tying together movement with physicality and geometry, I came across some interesting literature showing that in people and also in animals, the heart rate is really linked to the size of the body because you're creating a wave pattern. So if everything's back to easing these invisible circulatory patterns, and that the movement is part of that, then the kind of physicality of the body is coupled to the size of the body is coupled to that heart rate because it's related to what to the distance it needs to travel.
Right. It's defined by three-dimensional space and architecture for sure. And the thing for Westerners, I think, which is hard, is that we think, oh, well, the lungs is the breath. And what we're saying is, no, the universe is breath. And you are an expression of that breath. And the lungs have an important place in the body's organ system. In the Neijing, it says they rule the timing and the rhythm of things, the J. Um, but my fingernail is breathing, my elbow is breathing, my knee is breathing, my kidneys and my pancreas are breathing. People know this, for example, who practice visceral manipulation or craniosacral. It's that everything is breathing. And as a matter of fact, in Neijing, in nature-based medicine, what we've kind of developed, the main cause of all human illnesses that are chronic over time is impairment of breath, period. And the treatment of all of those illnesses is the restoration of breath to some degree. And that's like a total mind bender, complete change of orientation about healthcare. And it has amazing consequences in terms of treatment, how we understand disease. So, for example, if your body's a breathing system, it's the breath that keeps it healthy. You're born, by the way, when you take your first breath and come into the world, that's when you transit into this world. You die when you take your last breath. So, really, we are breath. And it's the quality of that breath that determines our experience in life and whether we have health and illness. The thing is, though, we are not breathing ourselves. Nature is breathing us. What does that mean? We're in a breathing landscape, we're in a breathing field that formed us. We are formations of breath that comes from a breathing field. And we don't want to be all alone with our lungs working to move the breath. We actually want to be in a breathing field that breathes us. So that means our goal is to live a participatory life in nature and its breathing field, and to allow nature to breathe through us. It's much greater than we are. And when we do that, then we have a lot more power and health and vitality.
That that's quite profound and a very different orientation to how most people think about it. Going a couple steps back when you were talking about how illness arises from an impairment of breath, I found a very strong overlap with that idea in the cell danger response that's been developed by Bob Navio. Because when cells or tissues are going through the cell danger response, I called it the cell healing cycle, right? So it's kind of a different breath that they need to go through to become whole again. They leave the central network to go run that more primitive program. And one place that cells and tissues can get stuck is that they kind of handle the infection in step one, like the infection or the cut or whatever. Step two is replacing biomass in this model. So they need to grow and repair. And then in step three, they need to rejoin the network. And so if you have cells or tissues that are in any of those stages that can get stuck, but even in that third stage, then they're not breathing with the rest of the network. And that can be seen very literally in oscillations of calcium waves. So, for example, there's different, because we're using different models and different understandings, and that understanding is going to be more of a physical one, although it does have a lot of movement built into it. But one way that a liver cell knows that it's a liver cell is because it's doing like the Mexican wave with the at the same frequency with the other ones. And if you have liver cells that are oscillating at a different frequency, they're not participating with the structure of the liver. And that can happen then also with relationship to the central organizing network. So I always enjoy when I see parallels between some of these ideas that you're sharing and other disciplines, because it doesn't need to be sort of this or that. Uh, Cell danger response is very sophisticated and very advanced, and when they're finding the same thing.
And the correlation should be very strong and resilient, because we're talking about basic ways that the universe and nature organizes itself themselves, and so we should see those things when we look at a body or a part of a body, and we say, is it healthy? We've talked a little bit about how the Western story, the older story, is like you're a car with parts, and the parts break down, and when you fix them, you can go back to work, essentially. Um, and so you're healthy when you can work. It's essentially um, that's a pretty low bar for health. So when we kind of move into higher discussions about health, one of the ways we can look at health is, like you say, do all parts of the body work in service of the whole, or do they become self-focused, just like what you're saying? So if the liver gets hepatitis C and becomes inflamed, it starts to attend to its own issues,
Yeah.
dealing with inflammation, damage, fighting off the infection, and it can't participate in the whole. When it's healthy, it breathes, it moves with the whole. And especially that whole is organized, as you mentioned, by the heart and the light of the heart, essentially in the older writings. And so health is a form of coherent breath when we're looking. And how do we know that there is coherent breath? Light emerges, is what they say. So in Chinese medicine, we learn to look in people's eyes and see, is light emerging? Because light emerges in balanced breathing fields. And so when we look
Mhm.
at someone, and that produces joy and other things like that. So when we look at someone who's vital and thriving, and there's kind of a light in their eyes, that's because they have a coherent breathing field. And so there are a lot of overlays and correspondences there for sure.
Going back to life being organized around the sun, and I'm always careful that I'm not making everything too literal, because I understand that a lot of things have greater, deeper meanings that can't be reduced down to these ways of looking. But these kind of other ways of looking are also interesting, and they kind of support the idea there should be more explored in these areas. And one is around the role of light, like sunlight, for example, in the body. And one of the biggest missing organizing principles from my perspective of anyone who wants to look at biochemistry is that if you look at all the biochemical pathways, there are photons participating in there that they're just not written into the diagram. And once you start looking for the missing photons as part of the reactions, the whole thing changes. And it's so interesting to me. This is like the kind of weird big secret that's been kept, that hiding in plain sight. And I think that for people who want to understand things from that perspective, the interaction of light with our systems is going to be the biggest growth area. So for example, there's loads of examples that I've found once you kind of know what to look for. One is that all proteins absorb UV light, and we've known that for a very long time. And one way that we know that is because that's how research counts proteins. They shine UV light at it and they see what's absorbed. And if you look at studies on it, they always imply that the reason that proteins absorb UV light is so that we can use UV light to count them, and I'm wondering if that's not the actual reason. I'm wondering if it's because we live on a sunny planet that has these breath rhythms and that this is an important organizing pattern. But then once you start to look at it, for example, our uh, red blood cells are chromophores. They they operate very similar to like hemoglobin operates very similar to chlorophyll in plants, and then we have something called albumin, which is the most abundant protein in our blood. That's a fluorophore. So that's a chromophore that absorbs light in one bandwidth wavelength and emits it in another. So now you think about it that all
It's like
doctors all over the world are.
we're going to look back at this time and go, wow, our understanding of the health and medicine was so primitive. Oh my gosh, it was all, auto parts and things. It's going to be about light and resonance in the future. No, no doubt. And and also what we talked about last time, I think, is, if we look at something like DNA or the human genome, that's amazing. But that's not the important thing. As you mentioned last time, the important thing is, how does this cell number 375
Mhm.
know how to do its job today, and turn those genes on and off? We don't really know. Same thing with biochemistry. It's amazing. That's great. All we know. But that's not the question. The question is, how does it organize all those systems like a big symphony in time and when change in place, location, all those kinds of things? That all happens from this other story about coherence, of which light seems to be at the center of. And in the early texts, the analogies they were making is that the sun organizes nature, and in your body, your heart is the sun. So it's like a little sun. And it's the same, and it's shining out, and everything is revolving around it, and so forth, and turning. And we're in these breathing fields that created our body. And again, you have to say this over again. We're not like nature. It's not that nature is important for our health, that we should go forest bathing. That's great. It's that we are nature. There's no separation. That you are a formation of, you are breath in form of the same breath that creates nature, the same breath that creates all the plants in my garden, created me. When I look out in the garden, it's doing well. I'm doing well. So we're also in this precarious time where we're doing a social experiment about changing the rhythms and seeing what happens without much understanding about them. Fortunately, there are some stable rhythms we're not interfering with greatly, which is the amount of time it takes to go around the sun and the movements of the moon and the constellations. So we have embedded stable rhythms, which is really important. But we're upsetting seasonal rhythms. And seasonal rhythms, the seasonal breath is set up by the polar ice and the temperate wind flows. So we have a contraction, a winter state, and it exists primarily at our poles. And so that's where the energy of contraction occurs in the seasonal breath, which is the wind and weather and seasonal patterns. And then we have wind patterns that traverse it in temperate zones in the middle. So when we melt polar ice, for example, it's like we're changing how nature breathes. And it's pretty resilient and can adapt around it, but that's really a key thing that we want to be careful of. Now, you might say, well, Dr. Neil, if I live a rhythm based life, how can I influence nature? Because if nature made you, and when nature changes, you change, the same is the reverse is true. If I change, nature changes. But I'm only one person. But what if a million people did it? You know, there's been a lot of new, kind of resurgence of breath therapy things, which is wonderful. This is what we're talking about. How about if all children and all people just learned how to breathe? How about tomorrow at noon, if everybody in the world spent 5 minutes breathing in a peaceful, relaxed way together? What would the force of that be to restore nature? So we have this role, which is important. But it's hard if you're like looking at your phone all the time because you're in training to something that does not have a rhythm, and it puts you in that space, and it interferes with your sleep, all those kinds of things that we know about it. So what I work with my patients and myself is, how can we restore breath? How can you restore rhythm to your life? And one way is with the seasons. Even though it's chaotic, you can still do it. Um, I don't know. Where should we go from here? We have those passages about the seasons. Should we read those now?
Oh, I think that would be nice.
Okay, let me grab those. And for people who don't know, these are from the Neijing, which is the early textbook of Chinese medicine. It's where we do our research from and where most of my ideas come from. And hang on just one second here. It was up, but here it is. So this comes from Suwen chapter 2, the second chapter, and it's talking about how to live in accordance with the seasons. And they're going to tell you something that nature is doing and something that you should do. And by the way, you can substitute the word springtime for morning and substitute the word springtime. You can substitute the word youth for springtime, or you can substitute the word inhalation for springtime, or you can substitute expansion of the universe. It's basically a breath motion. And then we see it in all these different places. And this is what it looks like in nature. First of all, they talk about how springtime, in other sections, they talk about how springtime gives birth, summer grows to completion, autumn gathers, and winter stores. And this is about this motion between the hidden realm and the seen realm. This is actually another whole topic about that. If you're breathing well in your life, you should have places that are hidden and private and places that are seen and public. And today that's a problem for lots of people because there's a tendency to want to share everything. And if you want to
Yeah,
share,
this is what I had for
this is what I
breakfast.
had for breakfast, right? Yeah, I just got my hair cut, blah, blah, blah. This is what I think about. I just went through this deep personal thing. It's not bad to share with friends and things like that. But in terms of breath motion, if it's all outward, you're never returning to your root. This is really so. I encourage my patients to have a private place. That means a private place means there's a private place where only you know about it. There's a private place where only you and your spouse know about it. There's a private place where you and your family know about it. There's a private place where you and your work people know about it. So there's these spaces that we move. We're not trying to be secretive. We're trying to mimic how nature breathes. When things go back to the root of a tree, it's hidden way down inside. This is also very important. We're working with artists to bring some of these ideas to art students and artists. Um, and the idea there is that the creative process is breath also. So, for example, if we're working not art in the sense of someone hired me to do something and I'm going to figure out how I can make the most money and make a thing, that's another whole issue. But if you're actually just moving with creative impulses, which is something we all have access to, not just artists, it means that something has to return to a root, and then an unseen impulse has to stir from that root. And then it has to push out and stick its little branches out of its little seedling aspects out of the soil, and you don't really know what it is yet. And then it takes form, and then it becomes mature, and then you share it with the world in the summertime of the work, and then you let it go in the autumn time, and then you return back to the root for the next impulse. And that's so another way when we talk about with our patients about how to restore rhythm in their life, we talk about art because art is breath in that way. Anyway, so here's in another part of the Ling Shu, they say morning is like spring, midday is like summer, sunset is like autumn, midnight is like winter. There's another part where they're talking about seasons in another way. Yang, which means the initial expansion, bursts. Yin grows and completes. That's like in the summer. Yang kills in the autumn time, and yin stores. So this is another part we have that the seasons can teach us wisdom, is that in modern times, we like to be over in the springtime all the time, in the summer, something being created, something being done. And we're very touchy about being over in the autumn time where things kill. And this is a sacred kind of killing. It means when the leaves don't just fall off trees, by the way, they get cut off at their junction, and the tree lets the leaf go. And it lets it go so that another breath could be reborn. And so this is another problem as Westerners we have, which is we love to live over in the springtime of life, but we don't really know how to navigate the autumn time. What does that mean? Every season, every day, every breath, there should be a place where you let something die. And you have to let something die to create space for something new to be born. So in the autumn time, I do several things with my patients. And one of the things is we kind of do an inventory. What is something you don't want to take into the next year? What is something that's time is ripe for dying? Because if you're moving with the season, it's like surfing. If you're lined up with the seasons, all of that energy of the seasons will move with you and achieve that goal. So we do that thing, and then you can like write it down and burn it or do a ritual, something like that. But if you can't do that, breath can't occur. Anyway, so in the second chapter, the Neijing, they talk about springtime, which is Qun in Chinese. Qun san yue su wei fa chen. So Qun, the 3 months of springtime, which start in February in this calendar, are called emerging and displaying. So things are like just coming out. Imagine like you just had a child. They just came out. What's an aspect of springtime? What is we one of the things we say all the time is there's no right and wrong. There's right relationship now. So that means there's right relationship to a springtime expression. And wrong relationship. What is right relationship? Well, when something's coming out, a child is just born, a plant's just coming through the sun, you don't walk all over it. You kind of make a protected space. You don't impose an idea of what it's going to become when you don't know yet. You know, you give it nourishment so that it could become the thing that it's going to become. So it's called emerging and display, Fa Chen. During this time, heaven and earth shung, they birth everything. And that means the process of birth, just like in a woman's pregnancy, the embryo actually develops in the wintertime inside the womb, out of sight, in the hidden space, and then it moves through the birth canal. That's the springtime when it comes out into the world. It's emerging and displaying itself. The 10,000 things express their glory. One of the things it's hard to see without reading the Chinese is how many of these characters are the images of beautiful plants and trees and doing things. It's all about plants and trees in the Neijing. Lay down when the night arrives. So that would be like when it sets. And arise early because it's the rising energy that is important. It's there. So if you're doing shift work, you're actually going completely against this. Stroll around the courtyard with broad, easy steps and loosen your hair and relax the body. So you're airing it out. It's been in the north in the winter, and now things are coming out. Shake it off. Not ready to do anything yet, but just relax. We have a Chinese formula you probably know. Xiaosan, free and easy wanderer. It's for this problem, this area. In this way, allow the deep force of who you are, your will, to emerge. It's been inside and it's going to move through you like that creative impulse. At this time, nourish life and do not kill. Autumn time, there's some killing that happens. That's why executions happened in the autumn in China. Springtime, it's all about new life. Give freely and compel nothing by force. Don't make something do something because it's just moving around trying to find its way. Be free with your givings and do not punish. Give freely and do not punish. In this way, the music of the springtime qi corresponds with the way of nourishing life. This is how it's done in springtime. And here this term is like a resonance of the field of the breath. That's what it does. It's its way. Acting against these things harms your liver because the liver is the organ of springtime. We say the liver is not like springtime. The liver is springtime in the level of an organ. This was we were saying before. If you do that in the summertime, there will be sicknesses with cold transformations, and the capacity to receive and grow is diminished. Like you won't be able to move into your full maturity in the summertime. This is also kind of a problem we have as Westerners. We only see the things as they are now. There's a problem now. Let's deal with it now. In Chinese thinking, the problem here today was developed previously, and this is just the final expression of it. So we're always kind of running around trying to chase things that are appearing. In the summer, the 3 months of the summer, the Xia, San, Yue, are called prolific blooming, and just pictures of plants coming out and expressing their beauty. And again, the transversing of these two domains, the hidden and the revealed. Now in summertime, it's the opposite. Now it is revealed. And this is the time where you share everything in communion. In the wintertime, it's more about privacy. In the summertime, it's more about being with your friends, being out in the sun, sharing yourself. Retire late and arise early. Here's one for you. Never get tired of the sun. You know, I remember skin cancer, by the way, was not a big deal when I was growing up. It became a big deal about 1980, uh, when we
Mhm.
went sunscreen crazy and so forth. And I'm not saying don't wear sunscreen, by the way, but um,
I am.
yeah. But this idea that the sun is only damaging to you, which we have now, is not the way it used to be. And we used to spend a lot of time in the sun. And I think there's real reasons, biochemical reasons, that you recharge in the summer. Maybe you have more ideas about that. But it's not just that the sun feels good, it's like you need it to charge your battery in the summertime. Allow your deep expression to be free of anger. Don't be angry. Permit your flowering and blooming to mature and ripen. You are a plant. We talk about the plant body in nature based medicine. I hate to break it to you, you are a plant, essentially. Allow your chi to pour out, like expressing your love to the entire world. Isn't that a beautiful? And why is that? Why do they talk about this in summer? Because love is the energy and the expression that comes from your heart out. And that is the organ of the summertime. So when there is light there and breath and movement, it comes out as love. Pretty amazing they said that 2,000 years ago. In this way, the music of the summertime chi corresponds to the way of maturation and growth. Opposing these things harms your heart. In autumn, there are diseases of malaria and intermittent fevers, and the power of autumn's gathering is diminished. So, if you don't attend to the summer, then the next phase of breath can't occur, and you'll have diseases there related to its lack of functioning. At the time of the winter solstices, serious illnesses will arise. And then in autumn, Qiu, San Yue, the 3 months of autumn, are called Rongping, receiving and balancing. So it's about harvest time and taking in, making the wine and so forth, the alcohol. At this time, the heavenly chi quickens and the early chi brightens. By the way, if you're a practitioner, we're looking for these signs of changes of seasons where we live, because they'll be different, like where I live and you live. And so then we change our approach and our treatments. In autumn time, what I'm looking for is a quickening of the air, which means there's all of a sudden a slight chill in it, which contracts it. In summertime, it's very, we call it huan, relaxed. Then autumn comes and all of a sudden it's like, it went like that. And there's a special quality of illumination because autumn sits kind of in the changing place between inner and outer, and the light of the heart and of nature comes out and is seen most easily then. So there's a change in the light too, if you're watching. Retire early and arise when the chickens all begin to stir. Arise early. Allow your deeper force to be peaceful and tranquil, and in this way, soften the effect of autumn's punishments. It's a time of letting go of loss, of death, so that new life can be born. So if you need to be kind of balanced and peaceful and keep breathing this way, there's also an attitude. What's a good attitude? If you've had a wonderful year and autumn comes and the leaves are turning, what's the attitude of it? Fighting against it, getting angry that it's leaving? It's reverence and celebration. It's like when you're at a funeral of someone who's lived a good long life, um, then you feel this beauty of the celebration and the reverence of what was. And that can be very deeply beautiful too. Gather and restrain the Shen Qi, the light, and allow the autumn Qi to come into balance. Do not extend your will into the outer world. It's doing things. Purify the lung Qi. In this way, the music of the autumn Qi corresponds to the way of gathering and taking in, harvesting. Opposing these things harms your lungs. In wintertime, people will have diarrhea, and the power of autumn and digestive problems and the power of autumn's ability to gather and store is diminished. And so if you can't return things to the winter root, then the wintertime is going to suffer. You see how that works? Then in the wintertime, Dong San Yue, the 3 months of winter, are called closing and storing. At this time, the water freezes and the earth cracks. Take care not to disturb the yang. So in wintertime, you're supposed to be inside the house, resting in front of the fire, repairing the farm tools, not going out and playing football in the snow, things like that, staying out late and partying all the time. You're supposed to let the yang rest, because if you move the yang, it's moving counter to the seasons. It's trying to breathe you. Retire early and get up late. You must wait for the sun to first shine in the sky before getting out of bed. Allow your will to be like something concealed, like a hidden thing, something with a secret meaning, like something that has already achieved its goals. And that's what I'm talking about, the realm between the hidden and the revealed. That's about breath motion and moving back and forth and creativity. Avoid the cold and move towards the warmth. Do not allow your sweat to come out of your skin. Be quick to hold on to your chi. In this way, the music of the winter chi corresponds to the way of storing. Opposing these patterns injures your kidneys, which are the organs of winter. In the springtime, atrophy reversals and the potential to birth new life is diminished. So that's the passage from that. The other thing is, if you're talking about healthcare, those changes are mirrored in your river system. Remember, the channel system we now know was the vascular system. And there's all this very complicated flow of the waters and rivers of your body. And they have something we call the seasonal river tide, which means that they are fluctuating with the changes of the seasons too. And in the summer, they're deeper down and moving through the deeper channels in the winter. And then in the summertime, they come out and they float up into your collateral beds near your skin, and you see changes in the complexion and so forth. And there was a beautiful way that they used to talk about taking the pulses, and they talk about this in terms of the seasonal river tide. And I'll just read that real quickly because it's so lovely. To correctly assess the pulse, empty yourself and become still as if holding something precious. So you're moving into a different state to perceive it. In the days of springtime, the pulse should be floating like a fish swimming through the waves. Whew, isn't that lovely? In the days of summer, the pulse is flooding at the skin, showing the fullness of the 10,000 things. In the days of autumn, the pulse resides just under the skin, like hibernating insects that are preparing to return back to the earth. Or you can imagine it's called the floating pulse. The leaves way up on the tree turning red, and the energy is being withdrawn from them, but the form of the leaf is still there. So you feel this floaty thing, but its energy is being withdrawn underneath it. In the days of winter, the pulse is like the hibernating insects that have gone back close to the bone, back into the earth, or like a noble person who remains in their contemplating within the rooms of their house. I love that one. It's like you stay inside, it's all warm inside. Therefore, it is said to know the pulse, palpate and discern its order, so forth and so forth. This is called the great method of taking the pulse. So, in practice, also as acupuncturists, we have a very close relationship to nature, should have, and we should constantly be watching what's happening in nature outside of our window. And it's when we walk to work and so forth, because it's telling us how the breath is changing.
Fantastic. It's yeah, it's a whole different way of orienting yourself to what's going on. You know, we're so used to separating everything and looking at things in isolation, and this is just a really connected and expansive way of looking at things.
I think there's also this way that when life is only about acquiring wealth or achievement at work or whatever it is, it's exhausting because there's no rhythm there. That essentially the story there is you should be working all the time until you're exhausted at nighttime, and then you should get up the next morning and start it all over the same. And maybe 2 weeks out of the year you can go to Mexico for vacation and get drunk. But most of the time you're supposed to be just a little marching. And that's not how breath works. That's like taking in a breath and holding it and trying to live your life. Um, so we want these times where we're letting go, we're letting things die. Um, that we're letting things be reborn when we don't know what they're going to be next. That's also, part of the creative process. When you have a child, you don't know who they're going to be, things like that. So you have to make space for that. Um, the thing is, when we talk about why does a human being do a certain thing or think a certain way or choose a certain life path, and we think it's all about free will and this and our minds and then blah, blah, blah. It's not. It's about our breath and our circulation and our light. We are creatures that love breath and circulation and light, and we make our decisions based on that. For example, you make your decisions about the friends to have, the job to take, about how it feels in your body in terms of the breath and the light and so forth. And so these things are critical. And if you put it back into the discussion and change the story, that is life changing and world saving potentially. The thing is also with kids, it's always poignant to me because they have no trouble getting this. Do you know, like if you tell a 4-year-old this, they go, "Yeah, I just felt spring breathe on my face." And then we talk them out of it. No, you're actually a machine with parts. You go to work and your value is like how much money you make and blah, blah, blah. And they're like, really? And that's just a big form of cultural depression. So if we could just like not talk them out of it in the first place and wait a generation, we'd be doing pretty good.
Sounds like a good plan.
Yeah, we'll do that next. The part about this is also one of the main goals of like my work and my thinking, as I mentioned before, is to help people live an immersive life and versus a small story based life. And what does that mean? Immersive life means you're not like nature, you are nature. You're not like breath, you are breath. And you're participating in this beautiful field of breath. And your atoms were made in a star, that's furnace and all that kind of stuff. And when you look up into the night sky and see the stars, if you can still see them, they're not separate from you. You're actually come from them and you're part of that. So you're part of this amazing breathing field. And the earth is one of the most special ones in the universe. You know, it's a very special place. The opposite is the small story. It's all about me. You know, I'm in charge of my destiny. It's all about my free will, blah, blah, blah. And the image that sometimes I use in teaching is it's as if you're a person in a rowboat in the middle of the ocean and you can't see over the sides of the rowboat. And you think that the rowboat is the entire world and that you are the captain of the rowboat. And it's all in your control. And wherever you move your oars, you're in charge of everything, but you don't see anything. And it's a very barren world in a certain place. And what you don't see is the entire cosmos around you and the beautiful ocean with all the things in it that are moving you on its tides. And so we want to get out of the rowboat and swim in the ocean. And one of the ways we do that is to let nature breathe us.
Fantastic.
It all seems pretty clear what you kind of change your story a little bit.
It's pretty
It's
simple.
pretty,
It's pretty simple.
this is
It's
why we'll have
straightforward.
another one about stories because all these things, all these issues are embedded in stories. And the stories is the change agent. That's where we can change things. Um,
Oh, I'm excited to jump into that.
I want to hear about the neurology of stories about that because that's really, you know, we talk about climate change and how difficult the world is at the moment, how things are falling apart. By the way, why is the world falling apart now? In one sense, because we love growth and the springtime things, and we don't like the autumn times things. We don't like thinking about letting go of loss, of getting old, all that stuff. Every aspect of the breath of the seasons is equally as sacred. And so we always say if your dying is not as sacred as your birthing, think more because it is. But if we live in a culture where everything is about growth, the economy has to continue to grow, the population grows, we're outstretching resources, that's all on one aspect of breath. And what is nature, who's in charge of all this, going to do when one aspect of breath becomes unbalanced? They're going to invoke the opposite one, the one about breakdown, about killing, about chaos and confusion. And that's built into breath motion. So if you don't live in a balanced way, nature will balance it for you and will bring in things that create chaos and, you know, struggle and dying and things like that. Where if you understood the breath pattern in the beginning, these would all be beautiful expressions of the sacred dance of the seasons. But if you're unaware of that and you're hanging on to one season of breath, it will invoke it for you. So there's a way out for us there too. When people talk about climate change and how the world is, I'm still very optimistic, and there's several reasons why. And one is our stories can be so much better, like talking about breath and light, etc. The other is if you're in your little rowboat in the ocean, you have very limited resources and your strength is not very great. But if you get out of the rowboat and you breathe with nature, all of nature is breathing with you, which is what you want. That's incredibly powerful. So right now I say we're using a fraction of our potential. So that's hopeful.
There's a lot of untapped potential.
It's like a fraction of a percent we're using, do you know? Um, here's a quote from Catherine Porter, who was a writer of the last century. There seems to be a kind of order in the universe, in the movement of the stars, the turning of Earth, and the changing of the seasons. But human life is almost pure chaos. Everyone takes his stance, asserts their own rights and feelings, mistaking the motive of others and their own. That's kind of the world out when you're in the rowboat, you know. But we can change that almost as easily as changing our story.
I'm speechless.
Easy peasy, lemon squeezy, as they say.
Easy peasy. Done. Sorted.
Yeah. So shall we? I'll look forward to seeing you next time. I don't know what we're going to talk about, but we'll think of something. And
Maybe we'll talk about stories, who knows?
stories. Wow, that is the magic sauce. That's where.
Alright, let's talk about some magic sauce.
Okay, but I also want to hear from you next time. Then I can talk about stories from my end, but I also want to hear about the neurological way we make stories because it is in our
We can talk about neurology.
yeah, because that is very special.
Absolutely, and back in the day, I spent quite a bit of time looking at hypnotherapy and clinical hypnosis, and where you get profound changes through storytelling. And I always felt like even if people weren't formally trained in hypnotherapy, if they were good at what they were doing in terms of helping people make positive change, they were doing a lot of these things already.
Yeah.
So that'll be cool to delve into.
Well, that sounds great. I'll really look forward to that.
All right. Well, thank
Yeah,
you.
thank you, and we'll see you next time.
See you next time.